Hey guys, Tim and Dave here, joining you once again in glorious HD with a real whiskey peculiarity here. What do we got?
We've got a bit of local flavour from New Zealand Whisky Company. This is Wheeler, a 21-year-old blended whiskey using some ex-bourbon casks, some whiskey that's been laid down a long time ago by one of New Zealand's sadly defunct distilleries. They shut up shop quite some time ago, and the barrels have been changing hands ever since. What we have here, it is mostly single malt spirit, 70% of that in fact. Remaining 30% is grain whiskey from the same source.
What a weird mix. It's almost like you turned the normal blend ratio on its head and tipped in way more malt whiskey and way little blend. So who knows what they were up to. They were up to all sorts of weird things over there. Now, you might be thinking, 21-year-old New Zealand whiskey, jeepers, creepers, where is my wowzer trousers? I must put them on right now. How did you get whiskey that old? And you'd be forgiven because there is a... actually, Dave, why don't you rip in while I tell the potted history of New Zealand distilling? Because it's...
This is a nicely presented wee sample.
It is. It's a gorgeous wee jobby there. But, yeah, the New Zealand distilling, or at least as far as whiskey is concerned, is sort of a... there's two chapters in it. And the first chapter begins in 1997, a very, very long time ago, not 1970, excuse me, a significantly longer time ago than 1997, and that is when the Willowbank distillery was built in Dunedin, and it was a proper big, factory scale, modelled after the distilleries back in the old country, full-on output plant to provide the nation with whiskey, and so it did on and off until 1997, when it was closed down. And it was really the only one, certainly the only one of that scale, it's still the only one of that scale, producing whiskey of any kind back then. So quite a lot of spirit was manufactured, and as Dave said, the casks sort of ended up here and there, and many of them were bottled, and they came under various labels. Almost none of them featuring Willowbank on the label. They were called Wilson's, they were called Dunedin Doublewood, they were called goodness knows what else. And it's only in recent years that the New Zealand Malt Whisky Company has kind of come into broad ownership of everything that is left. But the fact that the last whisky dropped out of those stills in 1997 means the age of all of this stuff is astronomical by default. So the fact that this is 21 years should not be a surprise. That's about as young as it could possibly be bottled this time if it was in cask. So there's this proto-era of New Zealand distilling which produced a lot of whiskey which is now exceptionally old. And only now in the last few years, really the last decade, we're producing whiskey again, and it's in this much, much smaller scale craft producers like Waiheke, which we just recently featured. And so there's this huge gap in our distilling history, and consequently this stuff, it was the quality of it, and I'm fascinated to try what Dave's brought along here, because the problem it has is it was never meant to go this long. The casks were not chosen, nor was the spirit distilled to age this long. It was meant to be sold pretty rapidly, drunk by students or whoever else, and then they were going to do it all again and carry on. The fact that it got to these vast ages was never supposed to happen. So it's a bit of a roulette cask to cask as to which ones have really survived and evolved and developed over the years, and which ones have just gotten tired and fallen over. Which whiskey absolutely can do. You think whiskey is ostensibly better as it gets older. It's not. It's only going to get older gracefully if it's been, the boxes have been ticked. So we shall see.
That's my theory behind the curious combination of majority malt whiskey and minority of grain whiskey, is perhaps that the malt whiskey had not stood the test of time as well, and needed top dressing from the mature grain spirit too.
To sort of
That's just
soften
me
it up,
speculating
maybe.
though. Yeah.
So, yeah,
and a quick apology, I've been referring to the New Zealand Whisky Company throughout this video so far. As a fact, the New Zealand Whisky Collection. The New Zealand Whisky Company may indeed be a different outfit. I forget the details.
I think one may be the other. They may have changed their name, because it has largely been the same people over the years, I think, curating these casks in Oamaru of all places.
But otherwise, it's an entirely homegrown whiskey. The barley is from New Zealand, from Otago in fact, from Dunedin, and local water of course, and matured using of course imported barrels naturally. But
it is 43%, and if that's coloured, someone was being very, very subtle about it, because that is exceptionally light for a 21-year-old whiskey of any type. So this is already fairly light touch in terms of the activity with this bourbon.
Check see if there's any note mention of colour and filtration.
I'd be reasonably surprised. Something tells me our local rules are pretty lax regards that stuff, and it does not mention it on the bottle. But never mind. Why is it called? Why is it called High Weeler? That's the amusing sound I make when I have no idea, and it's probably bollocks anyway. So there you go. Look that up on your own if you wish. I don't think your world will be rocked, but hey, they had to call it something, I suppose. Okay, dokie. On the nose. You can smell the grain.
Very mild.
Yeah, it's very, very mild. It's pretty sweet. It's fairly basic, but there is that kind of fudgy note, that coconut ice almost, of old grain whiskey.
Some
See it
apple
coming
peels,
a mile away.
caramel, some toffee.
Yeah. It's, as far as the nose is concerned, there is not a lot of moving parts here. You've got that sweet fudge, you've got sweet honey, you've got sweet florals. Sweet seems to be the deal here. But that said, there's no fire, there's no burn on here. It's not aggressive in any way, and there's no off notes. So not a masterwork of complexity, but perfectly pleasant so far. Let's see.
Oh, I better go for a second sip. That just went away so quickly.
It's pretty ethereal, and this is, I think, we're running into trouble already. This is not whiskey which was ever meant to see the light of day this many years in the future.
Oh, there we go. Holding it in my mouth a bit longer, which took a conscious effort actually. Yeah, let's try it once more.
It's a little bit, despite its age, it's a bit spiritus. Not spiritus in that it's harsh, spiritus in that it's a wee bit empty.
There's a bit of a strong wood note to it, just a mature old oak flavour. There is a bit of that grain sweetness, a hint of what would on the nose be acetone, sort of a sort of almost solventy character. There's some good sweetness though, some almonds, some lemon, touch of honey. It is in its favour. It is pretty smooth, although any whiskey that has gotten this old and is not smooth has got some answering to do. Yeah. What kind of life it has led. This one, I think the problem here, and it does have a bit of a problem, is that the cask just ran out of life before the spirit did. The spirit might have sat there for 21 years. I think the last 15 maybe, not a great deal was going on inside that barrel except for it mellowing out. And so it's very mellow, but it hasn't gained a tremendous amount of depth. You've really got to hold it in your mouth for a long time to extract some nuance, some character. Otherwise it's a bit of a nothing whiskey. It's a flash in the pan and then the flavour is just gone so quickly.
And that has been my experience with Willowbank whiskies recently. That's not to say they're getting worse. They're just sort of settling into a kind of a holding pattern, and they're not really, I don't think they're really going to evolve any further. They're certainly better than they used to be. I remember trying some, they used to have hilarious names like the Water of Leith, which is just, fall off your chair funny if you're from Dunedin, but take our word for that. Really cheap, student whiskey type stuff, and that was harsh. That was very, very, very harsh. That's when they were only a few years out from the cessation of distilling, when I was literally 18, which is a long time ago now, and significantly closer to 1997, they had an 8-year-old blend and they had other stuff, and it was all pretty raw stuff, and nor was it expensive. So it's come a long way since then, but I think it just doesn't have the tools to really craft an experience like you'd expect and demand from modern say Scotch whiskey or Japanese or modern stuff. Not that that's an intrinsic problem in New Zealand whiskey as a whole. It's just an interesting quirk of this one. All of the, say anything from Waiheke in another 15 years time, that will be phenomenal whiskey. That's already phenomenal whiskey. But now that the whiskey is being built to age, this is not a problem that we will deal with 15, 20 years hence. It's just a weird time machine type thing, and a very, very unique problem to New Zealand specifically. But it's fascinating the more you think about it, really. But in terms of the whiskey, to score it fairly, it's in no way offensive, or has it become offensive?
I added water.
Is it not a fan?
And it kind of turned into pool water. It just tastes of
we've got a bit of
water with some impurities. It did not help it. I was very sparse on the water too. It did not improve matters.
There's a impure. It's a good word for this one.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and you can't help but see it in a give it kind of a pass. It's not the whiskey's fault. It's not the whiskey's fault. It's the quirk of the timeline. It wasn't. It didn't ask for this, Jensen. Then no one got that joke. Dave didn't even get that joke. Never mind. Games and whiskey, the ultimate crossover.
God, Deus Ex.
Oh,
right.
Here he goes. He's caught up.
Yes.
He's caught up. Do not post in the comments if you also got that joke. No place in the whiskey thing. Anyway, I diverge. To rate this one fairly, it's not going to be a sky-high meteoric score because it's not that kind of whiskey, but it's not bad either. It's a 79 from me. What do we think?
In a remarkable bit of serendipity, that is the exact number I've been formulating in my head. Yeah, this is not a bad whiskey per se. It is an interesting example. What happens to old casks? They've done creative things and turning it into a blended whiskey to try to wring some more goodness out of it, but it's just so limited. The range of flavours is small, and the intensity of which they hit is so light. It's just so much of a nothing whiskey. There's relatively little taste, and what flavour is there is gone so quickly. So it's, I suppose, a snapshot of what an old whiskey is like when it doesn't need to be old.
It's a snapshot of old distilling.
Yeah.
It's a snapshot of distilling before there was this huge long tail on it, before whiskey got ridiculously more expensive as it aged. It's a snapshot of probably how a lot of distilling looked as far as in the old country a much longer time ago than 1970. 1970, it wasn't, the whiskey boom had not quite begun, but it was certainly the value of old Scotch was known, and so it was being built more in that model. This was whiskey built to move, built to sell. It didn't. This was never on the cards, but.
You can get 21-year-old whiskey, which will be in a similar price range, but is leaps and bounds ahead. Even for blended whiskey, we tried a 21-year-old BBR blend not too long ago, which was rather that heavily sherried collection. It was
pretty crazy good.
Yeah, stunning. This is simply not stunning. There are younger whiskies which do things better at a better price. There are whiskies of an age which are just leaps and bounds ahead as well.
So I think we'd say, if you're interested in trying, in really getting a snapshot, a time machine of what New Zealand distilling was in a time that will never be repeated, and really what whiskey anywhere in the world was like in a time that will never be repeated, but that whiskey is long gone, because that was 100 years ago when it comes to Scotch whiskey, then I guess for the curious, this is out there, but otherwise, it's just a whiskey that is over the hill, I suppose. But it's not its fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault, Willowback. You were never meant to be here.
Just curious, quirky circumstances where casks needed to be used up. So good on them for bottling it and letting us try this 21-year-old expression, a unique incarnation of New Zealand whiskey and insight into that history.
All right, well, I hope you found that enlightening, and it'll save you having to seek it out yourself, because I'll bet there's bugger all to find outside of New Zealand anyway. There was literally a room full of casks we're talking about.
Good presentation though, and 100ml sample is
certainly nice.
Perfect size for just trying and having some more for later, and nice wee box, very nice presentation with a good bit of history. And
a piece of history indeed. All right, we've already gone long. Slanger, let's go, let's keep moving.